My core belief is that the family can heal itself. If it's rightly aligned, it can heal itself. But it also can keep itself sick.
Welcome back to another episode of Mad in Love, the podcast where we dive deep into the complexities of relationships, the path to healing, and the journey of personal growth. I'm your host, Dr. David Hawkins, and today we have Ernest Hart, and he's going to continue our conversation. This is folks, this is cutting edge stuff that we're going to dive into with Ernest about interventions and family interventions and the impact of narcissism on families and what do you do? Because it's not just the narcissist, it's not just the emotional abuser that needs help. Families are impacted, and Ernest, I want to welcome you. Thank you for joining us. Set the stage, Ernest, for what are we talking about here? We're talking about intervention. Let's talk about intervention. And I mean, what is an intervention? Why is it needed with the issues of narcissism and emotional abuse? But maybe just start with intervention. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm so excited.
I might try to weave both of those things in together, because intervention is needed when there's resistance to change, and the family system is what's protecting this sort of coping mechanism, we'll call it, defense mechanism, way to survive, and quite frankly, ways of being in the family that keeps it going. And so there's a dance happening, and that dance, unfortunately, is hurting people, but it's the only kind of method the family system knows to go daily. They're in survival mode, really. And so the symptoms start to show that, hey, there's something that needs to be intervened in on the core. It could be the music that they're dancing to. If you can stay with the analogy, it's like dad wakes up in the morning and he does this, and then mom responds and does this, and then the children have a effect and they do this, and then the grandchildren, when they have children, then they're doing this, and it goes back to the grandparents. If you look at them, you go, oh, I see how that happened. But before there's intervention, there's some need for insight to see these connections, to see this dance happening. And so I think of intervention as a way for us to gain insight and then also to take responsibility. And so I probably use that.
Is that one of the first things that you do, Ernest, is do you invite everybody to notice what to come out of automatic pilot?
Yes.
And to see, like, hey, the status quo is not really helping us. The status quo. So, in fact, you would say the family is coping with, adapting to something quite dysfunctional, and they need to notice. I mean, is that one of the first tools, is to notice what's going on?
Yeah, and to really see it from a perspective of health instead of a perspective of survival. That's the key difference, I think. And a lot of times families don't know they're surviving. They don't really know, like, they're in this place of survival. They feel like life is just life on life's terms. And we have this other problem in the family, but we don't recognize that we have shaped ourselves to support or enable it at a deep level. You know, it's not just I gave Johnny money to go to the store and he did something bad with it. It's I am now in survival mode from what I've allowed to continue to go in the family. And so everyone is in survival mode. Everyone has gained coping mechanisms. Everyone has got numb to the effects of this situation happening. And so they don't have the emergent feeling of today is the day, something needs to change. And I'm willing to allow for some things to get worse before it gets better.
What are some signs, Ernest, that alert you or should alert any of us, anybody who's watching this podcast? What are some signs that say to you, whoa, the family, this couple, these individuals, everybody is coping with something very destructive and change is needed? What what
Mhm.
what are the things you look for as a clinician?
Yeah, so on the outset, like there's making excuses for behavior.
Mm,
A
mm,
lot of excuses are made for the behavior to minimize it, to sanitize it, to to outsource the reason why it's happening, and just to say it's work, it's the day of the week, it's that time of year. This is always how we've always been. Those types of things minimize it and say it's just how our family is. Um,
mm.
and their expectations are that it's going to continue that way, but for a few people who are standing up in the room and saying something's wrong. And so whenever I see that one person is kind of against the family system of wanting to keep it a secret or keep it under wraps because they feel like it's going to do more destructive, um, have more destructive power in the family than it is good, then I know there's a need for an intervention. Because the belief is that it's better to keep the peace than to make peace. And so whenever I hear statements that want to
Wow.
keep the peace versus make peace, which means breaking something or intervening in
Oh,
something,
man.
then I go, oh, yeah, there's an intervention needed for sure. Because I might have tried something 4, 5, 6, 10 times to get the person of concern to do what's going to get them well. And for some reason, someone else in the family system talks them out of it, tells me that I'm too sensitive or I'm too like I'm critiquing too much what their behavior is, or it's not that serious. All those ways to minimize what's happening. And also, a lot of families will forget the pain of the last incident so quickly. They'll forget they were in emergency a month ago and it happens again. And then they won't follow through with the suggestions that they know they should. And they'll find themselves in the same cycle again.
I want to tell you this happens so regularly. And I'm not picking on women or men or anybody by saying this, but I just hear it all the time. I had it happen just yesterday. The woman said this, and she's, by the way, in a really troubled marriage. He is very narcissistic, emotionally abusive. And she said this, and I'd love for you to respond to this, Ernest. She said this to me. I, I like to be hopeful. I like to believe that you know that there's good things that are going to happen. I like to believe that I'm an optimist. So I
Mm-hmm.
like to believe that that things are going to just turn around. Now
Mm-hmm.
she's sincere when she's saying this, mind you.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say? You as an interventionist, you must hear that all the time. People
Mm-hmm.
saying, "Oh, no, well, we're just hoping that things will get better."
Mm-hmm.
What does that tell you?
So, yeah, that tells me that there's protective mechanisms going on, right? That's a protection mechanism. It's not a, it feels like it's a good, hopeful stance. Is really good to have hope, and it is. But false hope, I think we call it magical thinking in our line of work,
Magical thinking,
right?
totally.
Yeah, it says it's going to get better on its own. And it's like, well, if I look at it like an organism or a car or any system, it's not going to change without considerable effort, some real attention to something that is going to change the outcome. And so I start to recognize and ask the families, what are you doing for you to be hopeful for it to change? Are
Ah,
you doing something you can hope for a change in? Because we always say this, right? You want something different, you're going to do something different. And if
yes.
you do something different, you can hope for something different. It's really a very simple terms that we forget because we get sophisticated in the ways that we shelter the behavior that is painful. We really get sophisticated in ways that we stop the pain for that moment that don't work long term.
My work is tough. Your work sounds really tough.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've got many people saying, "Yeah, I don't know that I want to rock the. I don't know if I want to rock the boat. I don't know if I want to rock the boat.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody though, somebody has come to you and said, I'm unhappy with the way things are. But anyway, so do you talk about the resistance that you experience as an interventionist?
Hmm. So yeah, that's exactly right, David. One of the main things is other family members not believing it's either a problem or that it will change. And so by default, they are slowing down or sabotaging the process for the person of concern to get engaged in some help and for the family at large to really address the issue. And
Hmm.
so what they'll say is they'll actually discourage the person who's standing up and saying the house is on fire. And they'll start to come for that person's character. There'll be even character assassination on painting them as a problem, and maybe they're unstable or they've always been this way. Oh, that's just Shirley, or oh, that's just John. He's always looking
Hmm.
for something that's wrong. He never had, like he has a negative outlook on life. All these different reasons why this person is standing up in the room and saying the house is on fire kind of gets again gets minimized. It's the minimization of the family system of what's wrong with the system. And so quite often it is the resistance comes from um, not wanting to confront an awkward and tough situation because they don't
Go,
believe it's going to get better.
go back to the start, Ernest. I mean, we're the leading authority in the treatment of narcissism and emotional abuse. And I'm presuming something, but I'd like you to make this clear. Are there families who have an emotionally abusive individual and they protect this person? And
Mhm.
like what do you find families to be protecting? What is it that nobody wants to, or very few people want to really face? Maybe there's one
Yeah.
person who is standing up and saying I'm unhappy. But
Mhm.
what are they protecting?
So that's a great question. So what I found, and even in my own lived experience, was um, it's complicated when you have a family member you love that is also hurting you. And that family member has taught you to behave in a way that dismisses the hurt,
Hmm.
that says it's not that big of a deal, or you're hurting me when you bring up my concerns. They play the victim, they get sympathy from the
Yes,
people
yes.
around them. And specifically in narcissism and emotional abuse, they've already seeded the ground for the whole community to kind of see their point of view and to villainize you if you come against that point of view. And so by the time that they come to us, the family system has been taught has been curated, I call it, to be fashioned to move this way with whatever narcissism is moving in and whatever emotional abuse is moving in. And if you do have concerns, you get retaliated against in ways that you probably couldn't predict because that's the nature of emotional abuse. It isn't obvious the ways you're going to be retaliated against, but you start to recognize it's going to come. And so back here in the subconscious, you know not to do it. It's a quiet rule that's happening. It's a shared reality that's happening. And no one wants to break the shared reality because then I would have to admit to all the sacrifices I've made that were in vain to protect this situation in life. And so it's almost a reckoning that we have to come to, that we've been contributing to this thing continuing to live by ways and means of protecting it. And so it's also something in us that we don't really want to admit our delusion, ways that we've
Hmm.
painted a picture and painted the red flags green and say it's going to be okay and I know I should stop but I'm going to go anyway, because there's something we also get from these relationships, which is this sense of like feeling important at some point and then trying to gain that love again back. It's like when a person drinks and they get the effects of drinking. It feels so good at that moment, that we think that that's the answer. We keep going back to it, but we never get fulfilled on it. But we keep telling ourselves we will
Walk
to
us through
validate.
what a family intervention looks like, Ernest.
So I start talking to the first person who calls about what your grandparents were like, what the parents were like, how are your children behaving, what are their marriages like, to see if we can track and make real this thread of behavior and coping, and see how it's tracked, and then start to craft how we're going to invite others into it, including the person of concern, probably the person who is the least willing to admit that this is happening inside them, which is quite often the husband. And so we want to be able to start seeing where we can invite people, because they're invitational, right? They're not hidden. We're not jumping out of the bushes and saying, hey, we're having this intervention. We're saying transparency and bringing the light to the situation is key, and people coming in by invitation is key, especially when it's dealing with narcissism and emotional abuse. And so we start to craft invitations that bring people into an happening, regardless if the person of concern comes or not. It's happening. And so we minimize any sabotage that the family system might want to engage in,
Ah,
because they will slow play it, they will deflect to something else, they will talk about vacations and birthdays and let's do it later, maybe it's not a good time. There will be all types of deflections that I have to deal with, and I just tell them we're doing it no matter what. And people are going to show up, and if you're not there, we don't get to hear from you. But if you're there, we'd love to hear from you. And so it becomes the thing that moves the family system forward, regardless of the coping mechanisms that try to keep it engaged in its normal system.
so tell us about the effectiveness of this. I would think that interventions, historically, I tell people interventions typically have been successful. Interventions work. I mean, they've worked with alcohol abuse, they work with drug abuse, they work with sexual addiction. I'm assuming that there's effectiveness when we talk about narcissism and emotional abuse.
So the 100%, well, I'll say 95% of the effectiveness is for sure going to happen to the family of concern, the family system as a whole. So my client, when I do family intervention, is the family system. And so I can watch how people get engaged and recognize and pay attention to how they contribute to the family wellness. And so as those members start to contribute to that, they get well. Even if the person of concern, let's say the narcissist in the family or the one who's doing the primary emotional abuse in the family, resists going to treatment, resists going to counseling, as the family system starts to heal, it no longer supports the emotional abuse. It no longer
Yeah.
covets it. It no longer is curated by it. It starts to break out of those patterns, and it feels more and more isolating for the person who isn't willing to get help versus the family at large. Because as we know, narcissism and emotional abuse starts to isolate some families from any help outside of
Yeah.
them. It's smaller and smaller. And so we want to make it bigger and bigger. Yeah, we want to change that system because it has been shrinking over time due to narcissism and emotional abuse. Even other addictions like sexual addiction that we find are paired with narcissism and emotional abuse, the shame of it starts to shrink it. You start to be um, less motivated to connect with people at an intimate level because you have this secret, you have this way of being that you're protecting, that you're embarrassed about, that you feel shamed about, that you're worried others might see. And the person who's doing emotional abuse wants to naturally cut you off from people who would break you out of the delusion. And it's probably something that's just tracking back here. And so what makes it harder is that the individual is not intentionally doing it in a way that says, I want to isolate you, but they are doing it for their own protective nature, their own protection around what is wounded in them. And so when we recognize that everything is about protection, then
Hmm.
we say we need more people. We need to expand things because my core belief is that the family can heal itself. If it's rightly aligned, it can heal itself. But it also can keep itself sick.
Wow.
Key, right? Knowing the power of the family system is going to help us to recognize we can keep ourselves sick or we can invite wellness into our family, regardless of what this one person does. And we start to find out we have a lot of choices that we didn't see before. It's part of the wellness journey. I have choices with this person. I can have boundaries with this person. I have advocates now. I have collaborators. I have people who see it and understand it because part of intervention is psychoeducation and saying, here's what's happening. Here's the signs. Here's what we witnessed. You remember when Johnny did this at the Thanksgiving? Yeah, that was emotional abuse. Do you remember when Cheryl couldn't come to this event? Yeah, there was emotional abuse happening. Oh, and then mom or dad might recognize the grandparents. Oh, I had emotional abuse in my family. My dad was emotionally abusive. My mom was emotionally absent. They start to recognize that this is widespread and that we have been living with this as a norm, but we don't want to do it anymore.
Obviously, without using any names, can you tell us a hopeful story, just sort of a short clip?
A couple of years ago, I had this family we worked with, and fortunately, we were able to draw in a lot of family members. So we had 4 generations on the call every week. And they started off wanting to do 3 month intervention. And so the key person was a 16-year-old, 17-year-old who was really dealing with some things. They called it anxiety and a little bit of marijuana, but I think there was more emotional things going on with him. And it had to do with his father and his mother and how they were. And so as we started to move forward, we recognized that there was some deep religious wounding in the mom's life that came out because she remembers being controlled in environments like this where we sat around and talked about our feelings. She remembers that being a manipulative place that she was really taken advantage of by religious leaders at the time. And so she developed some ways of being that were akin to what we would say are narcissistic traits, emotional unavailability, and it was showing with her children and her husband. And her husband had his own issues too. And so what we did was we invited the grandparents. The grandparents were able to attend, and the siblings were able to attend, siblings of the parents. So mom had her sisters and dad had his sister and his brother. And so we were able to really grasp the idea of family system change. And as we did, one of the most beautiful things that came out of it was the 13-year-old that was part of the process that needed to see that his family was dealing with that which he recognized. And
Wow.
it empowered him to start being something like a evangelist in the family, something like a call to arms, like, hey, listen, this isn't right. We need to have a family meeting. By the end of it, it was 3 months, then 6 months, then 9 months, because they saw the value of it. And it was really moving some things in the hearts of even the grandparents. And so they started to adjust to really speak into doing things like Al-Anon, counseling, family
Yeah.
counseling, um, all these therapeutic practices everyone was doing, including the kids. And they started to develop a common language that was healthy, empowering language that could confront in love because they didn't have that before. They kept it quiet. They couldn't confront. It was an argument or it was nothing. It was nothing got resolved before. And now they were able to bring resolution to the family. They were able to confront concerns, have concerns, and feel confronted in love. And as it went on, they were able to talk about deeper and deeper issues without being triggered and emotionally dysregulated. And I was like, at the end of 9 months, I was just sitting back and just watching them have the conversation with each other, and they were
Nice.
healing. The family
Beautiful.
system was healing itself. And to this day, years later, they tell me about their family meetings. They tell me about the graduations in the family. The grandparents email me about how grateful they were of the time. They felt so connected to legacy and seeing the legacy of their family being healed before they leave this earth. It was so powerful for them. They
Oh,
would have done it 100 times. So that's one of my most fondest memories of a whole family system being willing to address and see what's plagued them and do something about it and to continue doing it afterwards because it felt so good, even though it was so hard.
what is your goal for this family program at the Marriage Recovery Center? I'm assuming that it is the ability to openly share what is happening, that we see what we see, we know what we know, we feel what we feel, and we can talk about all of it openly. But
Hmm.
you tell me, is that your goal, or what is your goal?
Yeah, that's the mechanism to really have connection. I believe connection is the antidote to family woes. And if there's a problem with the connection, we need to deal with that. If there is distance and there's no forum for connection, we need to create that. If there's a language issue that we need to change the language and give some psychoeducation and kind of align people in language and have a common way of talking, we want to implement that. And if there's some need for repair, how do you address something and how do you resolve it so that there's repair in breaches in the family? And there were so many things in this situation. There was an uncle that was very off to the side and no one talked to him for years. And we brought him into the process and he was the catalyst for healing, the most healing, because he was able to say the truth.
Yeah.
Before then, he was the black sheep because he wanted truth, he wanted healing, but no one was ready to handle that. And so he made the family very uncomfortable. And so we brought him in, and his ideas and his ways of being forthright really healed the family. And the sister and the brother who were estranged were able to support each other in really hard surgeries and life events. And so my goal is to increase the level of connection at a real connection where we're talking about real life events so that we can process the issues of life and feel closer and closer when we do that. To not lean away from conflict, but to lean into it as a source and a pathway to joy. It's part of the deal. And so at the end of it, I want to be able to, it's like a sound you hear when people talk to each other in a high regard and also in a desire to be authentic. So that's what I'm looking for in the family system is that
I
authenticity.
love that. Let's close with this, Ernest. Who
Okay.
is your perfect referral? If
Mhm.
someone out there is thinking about Ernest Hart and thinking about family intervention, what does that look like? If you is it anybody in a family? If you're in a family and you have dysfunction and you want to rock the boat, anyway, I'll let you answer the question. Who should come and seek out Ernest Hart?
So if you're tired and you're weary of bringing the same topic up to people in your family, if you feel like there's a misalignment in what's happening and there's a misunderstanding and there's a need for us to see it the same way, and you recognize that there is protective mechanisms that keep it in place, if you can see some behaviors that have tracked from grandparents to parents now to children, you're a great candidate for an intervention because we're talking about a family system issue. And so if you don't know that that's the case and you want to explore it, you're still a great candidate for family intervention because if you're seeing these symptoms, it's because it's somewhere up the family tree and it's still going down the family tree. And I want people to really understand that that's the case. None of these symptomatic issues, therapeutic issues, come out of nowhere. They come out of a system of family. And so I would say anyone who's willing to address that, who has some courage, because it's going to take some courage, and I will be their advocate, they should reach out to us and allow for me to speak into what's happening in their life.
this guy will bring a really structured process to your family, and he will hold all of what is happening. He will help you hold it all. This is such good stuff, Ernest. All right, listeners, if any of this resonates with you, you can always start by visiting our website, www.marriagerecoverycenter.com, to book a free 20-minute phone consultation with one of our trained client care specialists to learn how to get started on getting help. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star review and subscribe to our channel to be notified of upcoming episodes. Until next time, I'm Dr. David Hawkins signing off for Mad in Love.